Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're stepping into a story that hides behind the curtains of small town America, a story about a man who looked ordinary, sounded kind, and lived quietly among his neighbors. But underneath that calm surface lived something darker, a hunger that would twist his desires into something deadly. This is the story of Daniel Reece, the man whose addiction to pleasure became a compulsion to kill. Daniel grew up in a quiet town called Redridge, tucked between pine forests and long, winding roads that led to nowhere in particular. Everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Daniel was the kind of person who blended in a polite smile, steady job at a local hardware store, always ready to lend a hand. No one imagined that beneath his calm demeanor lived a storm that he could no longer control. As a teenager, Daniel struggled with loneliness. His parents' marriage was cold and broken, filled with silence and distance. His father was a heavy drinker, and his mother often disappeared for days. Daniel spent his nights in front of a flickering screen, exploring the darker corners of the internet. At first, it was lasting curiosity, then it became escape. By his early 20s, he was trapped, consumed by the need for more, something stronger, something to fill the void that real life couldn't. He moved out on his own and lived quietly for years, his addiction growing in private, but what started as online fantasies began to seep into real life. He wanted control. He wanted submission, and soon he wanted power, the kind that comes when fear replaces consent. The first woman he met was named Lisa. She was bright, optimistic, and new in town. They met at a coffee shop, talked about music and books, and within weeks she thought she'd found someone gentle and understanding. But Daniel's interest wasn't love. It was need. Lisa began to notice small red flags, his possessive tone, the way he wanted to know where she was every hour. When she tried to end things, he begged, then threatened, then vanished. A week later, she was reported missing. Her body was found near a riverbank 2 towns away. No signs of robbery, but there were traces of restraint and struggle. It looked personal. Police started an investigation but found little evidence. Lisa's family believed she'd been targeted by someone she knew, but there was no proof. Daniel attended her funeral, silent, standing in the back. No one suspected him. The weeks that followed were quiet. Then it happened again. A young woman named Emily, a waitress at a local diner, disappeared after closing shift. Security cameras caught her talking to a man outside, but his face was partially hidden by a cap. The town began to whisper 2 women gone in 6 months, both seen with someone tall, with dark hair, and that same quiet smile. Daniel was careful. He changed his car, changed his patterns, and even moved to a smaller apartment on the edge of town. He told his coworkers he wanted privacy, that he was tired of people asking questions. At night, he drove miles away, meeting women from dating apps. He knew exactly what to say, charming, funny, pretending to care. But deep down, his addiction had crossed the line. It was no longer about desire. It was about domination. Investigators started connecting the dots. Both victims had been last seen using the same dating app. Both had exchanged messages with someone using the name Ryan. Detectives obtained court orders to trace the profile and found the IP address matched a house registered to Daniel Reece. One evening, while Daniel was at work, detectives quietly entered his home with a search warrant. What they found sent chills through the room. In a locked drawer were dozens of photographs, some blurred, some showing the same women smiling, screenshots from online profiles, phone numbers, and journal entries describing encounters in unnerving detail. One line in particular stood out. "When they stop wanting it, that's when I feel alive." That single sentence changed the entire case. The FBI joined the investigation, categorizing it as a pattern, organized, deliberate, and sexually motivated homicide. Daniel's psychological profile matched that of a compulsive offender, charming in public, emotionally detached, and driven by a loop of guilt and gratification that could only end in violence. They began surveillance, tracking his movements for weeks. But Daniel was clever. He sensed the pressure closing in and began planning an escape. He sold his car, quit his job, and rented a cabin 30 miles out of town. His last victim would be the one that ended everything. Her name was Chloe. She was 26, a nurse, and recently divorced. She met Daniel posing again as Ryan on a dating app. He told her he was a writer, that he'd come to the cabin to focus on his work. She believed him. On a Friday evening, she drove out to meet him. She texted a friend that she'd be home by midnight. She never came back. This time, police reacted quickly. When Chloe was reported missing, detectives immediately checked her phone records and saw the same pattern messages from Ryan. GPS data placed her near Daniel's cabin. By dawn, officers were already on their way. When they arrived, they found Daniel sitting outside, calm, smoking a cigarette. His hands were trembling, and when they asked about Chloe, he didn't lie. He simply said, "She didn't understand what I needed." Inside the cabin, they found evidence linking him to all 3 previous victims, jewelry, personal items, and a hidden compartment containing photos, phone logs, and journals that documented his descent. In interrogation, Daniel was detached. He spoke softly, almost clinically, describing how he saw his addiction as something alive inside him. He said he tried to control it, to feed it in safe ways, but that it grew stronger every time he tried to stop. He didn't see himself as evil, but as trapped by desire that turned to obsession, and obsession that turned to control. Psychologists later diagnosed him with compulsive sexual disorder, combined with antisocial personality traits. He lacked empathy and sought pleasure through dominance and risk. But even they admitted there was no easy way to stop someone like him once the boundary between fantasy and reality disappeared. The trial began 6 months later. The courtroom was filled with media, families, and people who'd once called Daniel a friend. The prosecution painted him as a predator who used addiction as an excuse for cruelty. The defense argued he was mentally ill, incapable of controlling his impulses. But the evidence was overwhelming. His journals, his photographs, his searches, his confessions all pointed to one chilling truth. Daniel Reece killed not out of rage, but out of need. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Daniel barely flinched. He was sentenced to life without parole. As he was led away, reporters asked if he felt remorse. His only response was, "I just wanted to feel something real." After his conviction, psychologists studied Daniel's case as an example of how sexual addiction can evolve into violent compulsion when mixed with power and isolation. His case forced a national conversation about the thin line between desire and control, and about how untreated addiction can spiral into something far darker. The town of Reedridge changed after that. For months, the community struggled with fear and disbelief. People who'd known Daniel, his neighbors, his old teachers, even his ex-coworkers, spoke about him in hushed tones, wondering how they'd missed the signs. Local schools began hosting seminars on addiction and consent. Churches held vigils for the victims. And for the families left behind, life became a long process of remembering without letting the horror define them. Chloe's mother later said in an interview that she didn't want people to remember the killer. She wanted them to remember her daughter's kindness, her laughter, and her courage. She pushed for laws requiring background verification on dating apps and better resources for people struggling with compulsive behavior. Her fight turned grief into prevention. Daniel's story became a case study in universities and law enforcement training programs. His interviews, later released with consent, revealed a disturbing self-awareness. He described his addiction as a hunger that grew with secrecy. He said he sought validation through intimacy, but every act left him emptier, so he chased something stronger, something more extreme. By the end, he wasn't seeking pleasure anymore. He was chasing control over life and death itself. Experts explained that this pattern, starting from isolation, escalating through addiction, and ending in violence, is not unique. It's a progression that begins with emotional neglect, deep shame, and a lack of healthy connection. Without therapy or accountability, the brain rewires itself, seeking ever greater stimuli. For Daniel, sex became power, and power became survival. In prison, Daniel reportedly showed no aggression. He spent hours reading, writing, and meeting with therapists, but none of it changed the past. Years later, he was found dead in his cell, ruled a suicide. On his desk was a letter addressed to no one. I thought I could control desire, but in the end it controlled me. That letter was made public, and it reignited the conversation around compulsive addiction. People debated whether Daniel's actions were the result of choice or disease. But for the families, the argument didn't matter. The damage was already done. The story of Daniel Reece reminds us that monsters aren't always born. Sometimes they're made slowly through neglect, denial, and unhealed wounds. His life was a spiral of need and shame that ended in tragedy for everyone involved. His addiction didn't excuse him. It destroyed him and those around him. In the end, the real lesson isn't about Daniel at all. It's about the importance of recognizing the signs of obsession before it turns into something irreversible. It's about teaching that love without respect is not love, it's control. And that addiction in any form can consume everything if left unacknowledged. So the next time you see someone struggling with desire that seems to own them, remember this story. Remember Lisa, Emily, and Chloe, the women who trusted, who loved, who were taken too soon. And remember that beneath every tragedy like this lies a series of moments where someone could have asked for help, or someone could have listened. Justice came too late for the victims, but their memory became the town's warning. Ridge never forgot, and neither should we. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please share it, subscribe, and join me next time as we uncover more hidden stories from the shadows. Stories that remind us how fragile the line between desire and destruction really is. Good night.